An orphaned waiter gave his last $5 to a hungry child, unaware the child's father owned the restaurant. The story might have sounded like a headline from some feel-good social media post, but for Marcus Evans, it was simply Tuesday, another day of trying to keep his head above the rising waters of life. The small diner where Marcus worked sat wedged between a pawn shop and a boarded-up pharmacy on the forgotten end of Maple Street. Rain pelted the foggy windows, turning the neon open sign into a blurry pink smudge against the gray afternoon. Inside, the vinyl booths creaked with age, and the ceiling fan clicked with each slow rotation, marking time like a tired metronome. Marcus wiped down the counter for the third time that hour, his movements mechanical, practiced. At 26, his face carried the weathered look of someone who had seen too much too soon. Dark circles shadowed eyes that rarely made contact with customers anymore. His shoulders, perpetually hunched as if carrying an invisible weight, moved beneath the white button-up shirt that was one wash away from being too threadbare for work. "Order up," called Greta, the cook who'd been there longer than anyone could remember. She slid a plate of eggs and toast across the pass-through window, adding, "Table 4. Marcus delivered the food with a practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. The diner was nearly empty, typical for a rainy Tuesday afternoon in October. Tips had been sparse and rent was due in 3 days. The folded $5 bill in his pocket, his last until payday, felt like both a security blanket and a reminder of how precariously his life balanced on the edge of disaster. He hadn't always lived this way. Once there had been a house with blue shutters and a mother who sang while she cooked, a father whose laughter could fill a room. But that was before the accident 10 years ago that had left 16-year-old Marcus alone in the world, bouncing between foster homes until he aged out of the system. The bell above the door jingled, pulling Marcus from his thoughts. A gust of cold air swept in, carrying with it a small figure. A boy, no older than 8 or 9, stood dripping on the welcome mat. His red sweatshirt was soaked through, the hood plastered to his head. Small sneakers squished water onto the linoleum floor. "Table for one?" Marcus asked automatically, reaching for a menu. The boy didn't move. His eyes, dark and serious in a pale face, scanned the diner before landing on Marcus. "I don't have money," he said, his voice so quiet Marcus had to lean forward to hear it. "But I'm really hungry." Something in Marcus's chest twisted painfully. He glanced at Greta, who was busy with the grill, then back at the child. The manager, Bill, would have a fit if he saw Marcus giving out free food. They'd already had 2 warnings about the diner's profit margins this month. "Come on," Marcus said softly, guiding the boy to the booth farthest from the windows. "Sit here for a minute." The child climbed onto the vinyl seat, his small hands leaving damp prints on the table. Up close, Marcus could see the faint freckles across the boy's nose, the way his dark hair curled at the edges when wet. There was something in his expression, a wariness, a guardedness, that Marcus recognized all too well. "What's your name, kid?" Marcus asked, grabbing a clean towel from behind the counter. "Leo." The boy answered, accepting the towel with cautious hands. "Leo Chen." Marcus nodded. "I'm Marcus. You like pancakes, Leo?" A small nod, then. "My dad says I'm not supposed to take things from strangers." "Smart man, your dad." Marcus leaned against the booth. "Well, where is he now?" Leo looked down at his hands. "Working. He works a lot." The familiar ache of loneliness echoed in the boy's words, resonating with something deep inside Marcus. Without thinking further, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled $5 bill, his last until Friday. It wasn't much, but it would cover a stack of pancakes and maybe a hot chocolate. "Wait here," he told Leo, heading to the kitchen. 10 minutes later, Marcus set a steaming plate of pancakes drizzled with syrup before the boy, along with a mug of hot chocolate topped with whipped cream. He'd convinced Greta to make them, saying they were for himself. "Eat up," Marcus said, sliding into the seat across from Leo. "It's on me." Leo's eyes widened. "Really? Really?" Marcus smiled, and for once it felt genuine. "Consider it my good deed for the day." The boy didn't need further encouragement. He dug into the pancakes with the single-minded focus only hungry children possess. Marcus watched, something warm blooming in his chest that had nothing to do with the coffee he'd been drinking all day. "Why are you being nice to me?" Leo asked between bites, whipped cream dotting his upper lip. The question caught Marcus off guard. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "I guess someone should be." Leo seemed to consider this, chewing thoughtfully. "My dad says kindness matters more than anything. That's why he works so hard." "Yeah. What does your dad do?" "He owns a restaurant." Pride crept into Leo's voice. "But not like this one. A fancy one." with tablecloths and everything. Marcus nodded, though something twisted uncomfortably in his stomach. He thought of his own parents, their modest home, his father's factory job, his mother's part-time work at the library. They'd never had much, but they'd given him everything they could, until they couldn't give anything at all. "Sounds nice," he said finally. "Your dad's restaurant." Leo nodded, scraping the last bit of syrup from his plate. "It's far from here. I'm not supposed to walk there by myself, but—" He trailed off, suddenly looking guilty. "But you did anyway." A small nod. "I was bored, and Dad said he's too busy to pick me up from after school today. Mrs. Wilson was supposed to watch me, but she fell asleep, and I thought—" He shrugged, the gesture too world-weary for such small shoulders. "I thought maybe he wouldn't be that busy." The rain continued to beat against the windows, heavier now. Marcus glanced at the old clock above the counter. His shift ended in 20 minutes, and then he'd have to walk the 10 blocks home in this downpour. His apartment would be cold. He kept the heat low to save on bills, and empty, as it had been every night for years. "Tell you what," Marcus heard himself saying before he'd fully formed the thought, "my shift's almost over. How about I walk you to your dad's restaurant? Make sure you get there safe." Hope flashed across Leo's face. "You would do that?" "Sure." Marcus stood, collecting the empty plate. "Just let me finish up here." 20 minutes later, Marcus had clocked out, explained to Bill that he was walking a lost kid home, and borrowed an umbrella from the lost and found box. Leo stood by the door, looking considerably drier than when he'd arrived, his small hand wrapped trustingly around Marcus's as they stepped out into the rain. "It's this way," Leo said, pointing down the street opposite from Marcus's usual route home. They walked in companionable silence for a while, Leo occasionally jumping in puddles despite Marcus's half-hearted warnings about wet feet. The rain had softened to a drizzle, and the late afternoon light gave the wet streets a golden sheen. "So," Marcus said eventually, "you live with just your dad?" Leo nodded. "My mom died when I was really little. I don't remember her much." "I'm sorry," Marcus said, meaning it. "My parents died too. When I was 16. Leo looked up at him, rain catching on his eyelashes. "Who took care of you?" "The state, mostly. Foster homes." Marcus steered them around a particularly deep puddle. It wasn't so bad. It was a lie, but one Marcus had told so many times it almost felt true. The reality, the succession of homes ranging from indifferent to cruel, the nights spent hungry, the constant feeling of being unwanted, was not something to burden a child with. "Were you scared?" Leo asked, his voice small. Marcus looked down at the boy, seeing something in his eyes that he recognized. The particular loneliness of a child who's lost a parent, who fears losing the one they have left. "Sometimes," Marcus admitted. "But you know what? People can surprise you. Sometimes when you least expect it, someone shows up and makes things better, even if just for a little while." Leo considered this, his small face serious. "Like you did with the pancakes?" Marcus laughed softly. "Yeah, I guess so. Though pancakes aren't that big a deal. They were to me," Leo said with the simple certainty of childhood. "I was really hungry. And sad. And you made it better." Something caught in Marcus's throat, a feeling he couldn't quite name. Before he could respond, Leo tugged on his hand. "We're here. This is my dad's restaurant." Marcus looked up and felt his stomach drop. They stood before the Imperial, arguably the most upscale restaurant in the city. Its elegant facade, with tasteful gold lettering and warm light spilling from tall windows, was a world away from the dingy diner where Marcus spent his days. Well-dressed couples entered through heavy oak doors, greeted by staff in crisp black uniforms. "Your dad owns this place?" Marcus asked, suddenly acutely aware of his worn jeans and faded jacket. Leo nodded proudly. "Can't touch her, come on." "He's going to want to thank you." Before Marcus could protest, Leo was pulling him toward the entrance. The maître d', a tall woman in an impeccable suit, raised an eyebrow as they approached. "Leo Chen," she said, her tone shifting from professional to personal in an instant. "Your father has been worried sick." "I got lost," Leo said, not entirely truthfully. "But Marcus found me and brought me home. He bought me pancakes with his last $5. Marcus felt his face heat at the unnecessary detail. "It was nothing, really." "I should go." "Please," the woman said, her expression softening. "Mr. Chen would want to thank you personally. He's in the kitchen. If you'll follow me?" Marcus hesitated, looking down at his rain-spotted shoes against the polished marble floor. He didn't belong in a place like this. Yet Leo's small hand remained firmly in his, tugging him forward with surprising strength. "Please, Marcus." Leo looked up at him with those serious dark eyes. "My dad will want to meet you." Something in the boy's expression, hope perhaps, or simple trust, made it impossible to refuse. With a small nod, Marcus allowed himself to be led through the restaurant. The dining room was a study in understated elegance. White tablecloths, soft lighting, the gentle clink of silverware against fine china. Waiters moved with practiced grace between tables, their movements fluid and assured in a way Marcus had never mastered at the diner. He felt eyes on him as they passed, taking in his inappropriate attire, his obvious discomfort. The kitchen, when they reached it, was a stark contrast to the hushed dining room. Here was energy, movement, the controlled chaos of a high-end restaurant at dinner service. Chefs called orders to each other, flames leapt from pans, and in the center of it all stood a man whose presence seemed to anchor the whirlwind around him. "Dad," Leo called, dropping Marcus's hand and running forward. The man turned, and Marcus saw immediately where Leo got his serious eyes. Daniel Chen had the same intense gaze, though lines of worry etched the corners. The moment he saw his son, however, those lines transformed into relief. "Leo," Daniel knelt, catching his son in a tight embrace. "Kiwan, where have you been?" "Mrs." Wilson called in a panic. "I wanted to see you," Leo said into his father's shoulder. "But I got lost and hungry, and it started raining. Then Marcus gave me pancakes and walked me here." Daniel looked up, noticing Marcus for the first time. He stood, keeping one hand on Leo's shoulder, and extended the other toward Marcus. "I can't thank you enough," he said, his voice warm with gratitude. "I've been out of my mind with worry." Marcus shook his hand awkwardly. "It was nothing, really. Anyone would have done the same." "Not anyone," Daniel said, studying Marcus with that penetrating gaze. "Leo says you spent your last $5 to feed him?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. He was hungry. "It's not a big deal." Something in Daniel's expression changed, a softening, an assessment. "It's a very big deal to me." He turned to one of the sous chefs. "John, take over for 20 minutes. The chef nodded, and Daniel guided them to a small office off the main kitchen. He gestured for Marcus to take a seat while Leo climbed comfortably onto a leather couch in the corner, clearly at home in the space. "Can I get you something to eat?" Daniel asked. "On the house, of course." Marcus shook his head. "I'm fine, really. I should be getting home. At least let me repay you." Daniel insisted, reaching for his wallet. "No." The word came out sharper than Marcus intended. He softened his tone. "I mean, that's not necessary. I didn't help Leo for money." Daniel paused, studying Marcus with new interest. "Then why did you help him?" The question hung in the air between them. Marcus looked over at Leo, who was now leafing through a picture book from a shelf near the couch, seemingly oblivious to the adult's conversation. "Because," Marcus said finally, "I know what it's like to be alone and scared, and sometimes all it takes is one person to make things a little better." Understanding dawned in Daniel's eyes. He nodded slowly, then reached for a business card on his desk. "Let me at least offer you dinner sometime, as a proper thank you." Marcus accepted the card automatically, though he knew he'd never use it. Places like the Imperial weren't for people like him, people whose nice clothes came from thrift stores, whose dining experiences were limited to the occasional splurge at chain restaurants. "Sure," he said, tucking the card into his pocket. "I should really go now. It was nice meeting you both." "Wait," Daniel said as Marcus stood. "How will you get home?" "It's still raining." "I'll walk." "It's not far." It was a lie. His apartment was at least 40 minutes away on foot, but Marcus had endured worse. Daniel frowned. "Let me call you a cab." "Really, I'm fine." "Marcus," Daniel interrupted gently, "you showed kindness to my son. Please allow me to show some in return." There was something in his tone, not pity, but a genuine concern, that made it difficult to refuse. Marcus nodded reluctantly and Daniel smiled, picking up his phone to call a taxi service. As they waited for the cab to arrive, Leo abandoned his book and came to stand beside Marcus. "Will you come back sometime?" he asked. "Dad makes really good dumplings. Better than pancakes, even." Marcus smiled despite himself. "We'll see, buddy." When the cab arrived, Daniel walked Marcus to the door. "Thank you again," he said, pressing something into Marcus's hand. "And I meant what I said about dinner. The invitation is open anytime." Only after the cab had pulled away from the curb did Marcus look down at what Daniel had given him. It wasn't money as he'd first feared, but a small, elegantly designed gift certificate to the Imperial. Enough for a proper dinner for one. Marcus slipped it into his pocket alongside the business card, a strange feeling settling in his chest. It wasn't until the cab turned onto his street that he recognized it for what it was. the faint, almost forgotten sensation of hope. 3 days later, Marcus arrived for his usual morning shift at the diner. The weather had cleared, bringing with it an unseasonable warmth that had customers filling the outdoor tables. He tied his apron with practiced motions, nodding to Greta as she flipped pancakes on the grill. "Busy morning?" she commented, sliding a plate toward him. "And someone's been asking for you." "Booth by the window." Marcus frowned. No one ever asked for him specifically. Curious, he delivered the pancakes to table 3 before turning toward the window booth. His heart stuttered when he saw who waited there. Leo, wearing a clean red sweatshirt similar to the one he'd had on that rainy day, and beside him, Daniel Chen, dressed casually in jeans and a button-down shirt rather than chef's whites. "Marcus," Leo called, waving enthusiastically. "We found you." Marcus approached their table, confusion evident on his face. "How did you know I worked here?" Daniel smiled. Leo described the diner in great detail. "The place with the really good pancakes and the nice man who gave me his last $5. Wasn't hard to figure out which one it was. We came to say thank you properly." Leo added, pushing a small wrapped package across the table. "Dad said it's rude not to say thank you when someone helps you." Marcus stared at the package. "You already thanked me. The cab, the gift certificate. That was just the beginning," Daniel said, his expression impossible to read. "Open it." Hesitantly, Marcus picked up the package. It was heavier than it looked, wrapped in simple brown paper. He unwrapped it carefully to reveal a book, The Professional Chef, by the Culinary Institute of America. It was new, the cover glossy under his fingers. "I don't understand," Marcus said, looking up at Daniel. "Leo tells me you were very kind to him, that you seemed to know exactly what he needed, not just food, but understanding." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "I also noticed how you looked around my kitchen. Not like someone intimidated, but like someone curious. Someone who recognized the heart of a restaurant." Marcus swallowed hard. He'd never told anyone about his childhood dreams of becoming a chef. How he'd learned to cook from his mother, standing on a stool beside her at the stove. How after his parents died, cooking had become his one connection to them. The one skill that made him feel like he still had value. "I'm looking for an apprentice," Daniel continued. "Someone to train from the ground up. The hours are long, the work is hard, and the pay isn't great to start. But for someone willing to learn, it's an opportunity." Marcus stared at him, sure he had misheard. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a chance," Daniel corrected gently. "The same kind of chance you gave Leo when you chose kindness over indifference. Sometimes that's all any of us need." The words hung in the air between them. Marcus looked down at the book in his hands, then at Leo, who was watching him with hopeful eyes, and finally at Daniel, whose expression held something Marcus hadn't seen directed at him in a very long time. "Belief." "Why?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't even know me." Daniel's eyes softened. "I know enough. I know you gave your last $5 to a hungry child without hesitation. I know you walked that child home in the rain when you could have called the police or simply sent him on his way. These things tell me about your character. The rest, the skills, the techniques, those can be taught." Marcus felt something shift inside him, like a key turning in a lock long rusted shut. "I would have to give notice here," he said slowly, hardly believing the words coming out of his mouth. "Of course," Daniel nodded. "Take whatever time you need. We'll be ready when you are. And I don't have the right clothes for a place like the Imperial." The admission felt small and shameful, but Daniel merely waved it away. "Kitchen uniforms are provided. For everything else, we'll figure it out." He reached across the table, not touching Marcus but offering his hand. "What do you say?" Marcus looked at Daniel's extended hand, then at Leo, who was practically bouncing with excitement, and finally at the diner around him, the place that had been both his anchor and his prison for the past 3 years. He thought of his empty apartment, his empty savings account, his empty future stretching out in an endless succession of identical days. And then he thought of kitchens, of his mother's kitchen, warm and filled with love, and of the Imperial's kitchen, alive with purpose and possibility. "Yes," Marcus said, taking Daniel's hand. "Yes, I'd like that very much." Leo cheered, drawing smiles from nearby customers, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt his face transform into a genuine, unreserved smile. Something that had been knotted tightly in his chest for a decade began, slowly, to unwind. As Marcus returned to work, promising to meet with Daniel properly after his shift, he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror behind the counter. The face that looked back at him was changed somehow. The eyes brighter, the shoulders straighter. It was the face of someone who had been seen, truly seen, perhaps for the first time since his parents died. All because of $5 and a hungry child on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The transition wasn't easy. Marcus gave his 2 weeks' notice at the diner, enduring Bill's disappointment and Greta's grudging congratulations. He spent his evenings reading the chef's book Daniel had given him, absorbing information about techniques he'd never heard of, ingredients he'd never tasted. His first day at the Imperial was terrifying. The kitchen moved at a pace that made the diner seem like slow motion. Chefs called out terms he didn't understand, and his station, the most basic prep position, still required skills he was only beginning to grasp. Breathe, Daniel told him at the end of that first shift, when Marcus's hands were raw from chopping and his feet ached from standing. No one learns this overnight. I'm slowing everyone down, Marcus admitted, the failure bitter on his tongue. Daniel shook his head. You're learning. There's a difference. He handed Marcus a small container. Take this home. It's Shanghai-style red braised pork belly, my father's recipe. Comfort food. The gesture, so simple yet so thoughtful, nearly undid Marcus. He accepted the container with a nod, not trusting himself to speak. That night, eating the most delicious food he'd ever tasted in his sparse apartment, Marcus made a promise to himself. He would work harder than anyone else at the Imperial. He would earn his place there, not just because of Daniel's kindness, but because of his own merit. Days turned into weeks. Marcus's hands grew calloused in new places. He learned to distinguish between a julienne and a brunoise cut, to prepare 5 different mother sauces, to hear the subtle sound difference between properly searing meat and merely cooking it. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the Imperial began to feel like more than just a workplace. It started with small things. Jean, the sous chef, correcting his knife technique not with impatience but with careful instruction. Ming, the pastry chef, slipping him leftover croissants at the end of shifts. Daniel pausing in the midst of dinner service to show Marcus exactly how to plate a particularly complex dish. Then there was Leo, who appeared in the kitchen after school 3 days a week, doing homework at a small table in the corner, occasionally asking Marcus to help with math problems or to taste test a new dessert his father was developing. You're good at fractions, Leo observed one afternoon as Marcus helped him convert a recipe. Most grown-ups pretend they remember school stuff, but they don't really. Marcus smiled. Cooking involves a lot of math, actually. Scaling recipes up and down, calculating costs, timing everything precisely. I guess I've had practice. Leo nodded solemnly. Dad says you're learning really fast. Faster than most people. Something warm bloomed in Marcus's chest at the secondhand praise. Your dad is a good teacher. He likes you, Leo said with the directness of childhood. He says you have good instincts. Before Marcus could respond, Daniel appeared, wiping his hands on a towel. Leo, are you distracting my apprentice? His tone was light, teasing. We're doing math, Leo replied innocently. Cooking math? Daniel laughed, ruffling his son's hair. Well, cooking math is important, but right now I need Marcus to help me with the special for tonight. He turned to Marcus. If you're finished with your prep? Marcus nodded, rising from Leo's table. This was new, being asked to help with a special rather than just handling basic preparation. I'm all done. Good. I want to show you how to make xiaolongbao, soup dumplings. Daniel gestured for Marcus to follow him to a quieter section of the kitchen. They're tricky, but I think you're ready. The simple vote of confidence meant more than Marcus could express. He followed Daniel, listening intently as the chef explained the delicate process of creating the dumplings that were among the restaurant's most popular items. For the next hour, Marcus focused entirely on learning the technique. How to make the gelatin-rich filling that would melt into soup during steaming. How to pleat the wrappers just so. How to ensure they didn't stick or tear during cooking. It was challenging, precise work, but the concentration it required was almost meditative. Good, Daniel said, inspecting Marcus's first completed dumpling. Very good for a first attempt. He demonstrated again, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. The key is confidence. The dough can sense hesitation. Marcus laughed. I'm pretty sure that's not scientifically accurate. Daniel smiled, a warm expression that transformed his serious face. Perhaps not, but it's true nonetheless. He watched as Marcus attempted another dumpling, this one more successful than the last. Cooking is as much about feeling as it is about technique. The best chefs cook with their hearts as well as their hands. My mother used to say something similar, Marcus said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. She said love was her secret ingredient. Daniel nodded. A wise woman. Was she a professional cook? Marcus shook his head, focusing on pleating the delicate dough. No, just a mom who made amazing food. She could make even simple things taste special. Those are often the best meals, Daniel said quietly. The ones made with love rather than technical perfection. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the pile of finished dumplings growing between them. Around them, the kitchen staff prepared for dinner service, the familiar rhythm of chopping, sizzling, and gentle instructions, creating a soothing backdrop. You know, Daniel said eventually, Leo's birthday is next month. He'll be 9. Marcus looked up. That's exciting. Do you have special plans? We usually have a small celebration here at the restaurant. Nothing extravagant, just cake and presents after closing. Daniel hesitated, his hands stilling over the dumpling he was forming. He's asked if you would come. The invitation caught Marcus off guard. Me? Why would he want me there? Daniel met his eyes. Because he likes you. And because, since his mother died, our circle has been small. Just us and a few staff members who've become like family. He paused. I think Leo sees you becoming part of that circle. Marcus swallowed hard against the sudden tightness in his throat. I'd be honored. He managed. Thank you. Daniel nodded, returning to his work. Good. He'll be pleased. After a moment, he added, so will I. The simple addition hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning Marcus wasn't quite ready to examine. Instead, he focused on the dumplings, on the precise movements of his hands, on the satisfaction of creating something delicate and perfect from simple ingredients. Yet even as he worked, Marcus couldn't help but feel that something fundamental had shifted, that he was no longer just an employee learning a trade, but something more. Something that, after 10 years of solitude, felt dangerously like belonging. Leo's birthday fell on a Sunday when the restaurant was closed. Marcus arrived early, carrying a small wrapped package and a bouquet of balloons he'd splurged on, despite his still tight budget. The restaurant was transformed. Tables pushed together in the center of the dining room, colorful streamers hanging from light fixtures, a hand-painted banner reading, Happy Birthday, Leo, stretched across one wall. Marcus! Leo spotted him immediately, racing across the room. You came! Of course I came, Marcus said, handing the boy the balloons. Happy birthday. Leo beamed, accepting the balloons in the small package. Can I open it now? Leo, Daniel called from where he was arranging plates on a buffet table. Let Marcus at least get in the door before you start tearing into presents. Marcus laughed. It's okay. Go ahead. Leo needed no further encouragement. He plopped down on the nearest chair and carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a beginner's cookbook specially designed for children, with illustrated instructions and safety tips. Wow! Leo's eyes widened. My own cookbook. I thought maybe I could help you try some of the recipes. Marcus said, suddenly uncertain. If that's okay with your dad, of course. Can we, Dad? Leo asked, already flipping through the pages. Look, there's one for chocolate chip cookies. Daniel approached, wiping his hands on a towel. That sounds like an excellent idea. He met Marcus's eyes over his son's head. Thank you. It's a perfect gift. The small party was unlike any birthday celebration Marcus had experienced. There were only a handful of guests, Daniel and Leo, of course, plus Jean and Ming from the kitchen, the maitre d', whose name Marcus had learned was Sophia, and now Marcus himself. But what the gathering lacked in size, it made up for in warmth. They ate Daniel's homemade dumplings and noodles, followed by a spectacular birthday cake that Ming had created. 3 tiers of chocolate and vanilla, decorated with miniature fondant books and cooking tools to reflect Leo's interests. They played simple games that had Leo laughing until he hiccuped, and they all cheered when he blew out his candles. Throughout it all, Marcus found himself drawn into their circle with an ease that was both surprising and deeply comforting. These people, who had known each other for years, made space for him in their conversations and their laughter, as if he had always been there. He's happy you're here, Sophia said quietly, coming to stand beside Marcus as they watched Leo unwrap a gift from Jean. They both are. Marcus glanced at her, uncertain how to respond. Leo's a great kid. He is, she agreed. And Daniel is a wonderful father. But it's been just the two of them for so long. She trailed off, then added, it's good to see them opening up to someone new. Before Marcus could process her words, Leo was calling him over to see his newest gift, a professional child-sized chef's coat with his name embroidered on the pocket. Look, Marcus, now I can cook with you and Dad. The evening continued, warm and joyful, until Leo began to yawn despite his protests that he wasn't tired at all. As the party wound down, the the others began to leave, each hugging Leo and wishing him a final happy birthday. "I should go too," Marcus said, noticing the late hour. "Thank you for including me. It was wonderful." "Wait," Daniel said. "Would you mind staying for a few minutes? Help me clear up." Marcus nodded, though he suspected the request had little to do with needing assistance. He helped gather wrapping paper and streamers while Daniel put leftover food into containers. Leo, exhausted from excitement, had curled up on a banquette and fallen asleep. "He had a good time," Marcus said softly, watching the sleeping child. "You made it special for him." "We all did," Daniel corrected, setting aside the last container. He hesitated, then gestured toward the small bar area at the side of the restaurant. "Would you like a drink? I have a special baijiu, Chinese rice liquor, that I save for celebrations." Marcus followed him to the bar, where Daniel poured 2 small glasses of clear liquid. They sat on adjacent stools, the restaurant quiet around them save for Leo's soft breathing. "To Leo," Daniel said, raising his glass, "and to new friends." Marcus clinked his glass against Daniel's and took a small sip. The liquor was strong but smooth, with a complex flavor unlike anything he'd tasted before. "This is good," he said, taking another sip. "Thank you for sharing it." Daniel nodded, studying his own glass. "My father gave me this bottle when I opened the Imperial. He said to save it for meaningful occasions." He looked up, meeting Marcus's eyes. "Tonight qualifies." The simple statement carried weight that made Marcus's heart beat faster. He looked away, unsure how to respond. "Marcus," Daniel said gently, "may I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Tui, what happened to your parents? Leo mentioned that you told him they died when you were 16. Marcus tensed slightly, then forced himself to relax. It was a fair question, asked with genuine interest rather than mere curiosity. "Car accident," he said finally. "They were coming home from their anniversary dinner. Drunk driver hit them head on." He took another sip of the baijiu, welcoming its warm burn. "I was home waiting up to hear about their evening. Police came instead." Daniel's face softened with understanding. "I'm so sorry." Marcus nodded, accepting the sympathy. "What about Leo's mom?" "If you don't mind me asking." "Cancer," Daniel replied. "When Leo was 3. It was quick. Diagnosis 2. The end, just 4 months." He swirled the liquor in his glass. "There was a time I thought I wouldn't survive it. The grief." "But you did," Marcus said. "For Leo." "Yes. And eventually for myself too." Daniel looked over at his sleeping son. "There's a Chinese proverb. The moon waxes and wanes, but after the dark always comes light. I try to remember that on the hard days." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, each lost in memories. Then Daniel spoke again, his voice soft but clear. "I don't believe it was coincidence, you know? That Leo found his way to your diner that day." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "No? What was it then?" "Orphaned," Daniel said. "It's a Chinese concept. The binding force that brings people together through seemingly random events. Like fate, but more deliberate." "You think fate sent Leo to me?" Marcus couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. Daniel smiled. "I think kindness is never random, Marcus. When you gave Leo your last $5, you weren't just feeding a hungry child. You were opening a door neither of us knew existed." The words settled over Marcus like a warm blanket. He thought of all that had changed in the weeks since that rainy afternoon. His new job, his growing skills, the gradual easing of the loneliness that had been his constant companion for a decade. "Maybe you're right," he conceded. "Though if it was fate, it was certainly working in my favor more than yours." Daniel shook his head. "You underestimate what you've brought to us, Marcus. Leo has smiled more in the past month than in the year before. And he paused, searching for words. "I've remembered what it means to trust someone new, to welcome them into our lives." The intensity in Daniel's eyes made Marcus's breath catch. There was meaning here, hovering just beneath the surface of the conversation, that he wasn't quite ready to name. "I should go," he said softly. "It's late and Leo needs to get to bed." Daniel nodded, accepting the shift. "Of course." He stood, walking Marcus to the door. "Thank you again for coming. It meant a lot to Leo." "It meant a lot to me too," Marcus admitted. "Being included." They stood at the door for a moment, the silence between them comfortable yet charged with unspoken possibility. Then Daniel reached out, squeezing Marcus's shoulder briefly. "Good night, Marcus." "Good night, Daniel." As Marcus walked home through the quiet streets, he replayed the evening in his mind. The laughter, the food, the sense of being part of something larger than himself. For the first time in years, his apartment didn't feel like a refuge from the world, but rather a temporary stopping place on the way to somewhere better. somewhere that, against all odds, might begin to feel like home. The seasons turned. Spring yielded to summer, bringing with it longer days and busier nights at the Imperial. Marcus's skills grew alongside the temperature, his confidence in the kitchen increasing with each shift. Where once he had been relegated to basic prep work, he now assisted with more complex dishes, occasionally even managing a station on his own when the kitchen was short-staffed. "You have a natural talent," Daniel told him one evening, after Marcus had successfully handled the appetizer station alone during a particularly hectic service. "You see cooking as more than just following recipes. You understand the why behind the technique." The praise warmed Marcus more than he cared to admit. "I had a good teacher," Daniel smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Two good teachers, I think. Your mother started you on this path long before I came along." It was true. As Marcus's confidence in the kitchen grew, so too did the memories of cooking alongside his mother. Kneading bread dough with small hands, learning to crack eggs without getting shells in the bowl, absorbing the rhythm of stirring and tasting and adjusting that made cooking feel like both science and art. "She would have liked you," Marcus said without thinking. "My mother. She always said you could tell a person's character by how they treated food and people." "High praise," Daniel replied softly. "I wish I could have met her." The moment stretched between them, quiet and meaningful. In the months since Leo's birthday, something had shifted in Marcus and Daniel's relationship. A gradual deepening that went beyond mentor and apprentice, beyond even friendship. Neither had put words to it, but it lived in small touches, in lingering glances, in conversations that stretched late into the night after the restaurant closed. It lived, too, in the way Marcus had become part of Leo's life. Regular cooking lessons using the children's cookbook had expanded to include homework help, weekend trips to museums, and impromptu picnics in the park when the weather permitted. The small, serious boy who had walked into the diner that rainy day had blossomed into a cheerful, curious child who now greeted Marcus with flying hugs and endless stories about school. "Dad," Leo announced one Sunday morning as the three of them prepared brunch in Daniel's apartment above the restaurant, "I think Marcus should live here." Both adults froze. Marcus in the middle of whisking eggs, Daniel as he sliced bread for French toast. "What makes you say that, Leo?" Daniel asked carefully. Leo shrugged, continuing to stir the batter he was responsible for. "He's here all the time anyway. And his apartment is tiny and far away. And we have the extra room that's just full of boxes." He looked up, his expression entirely reasonable. "It makes sense." Marcus felt heat rise in his face. "Leo, I mean, your dad and I haven't—" "It's not that simple, buddy," Daniel interjected gently. "Adults need to make these decisions carefully." "Why?" Leo persisted. "You like Marcus. Marcus likes you. I like Marcus. Marcus likes me." He counted off the points on his flour-dusted fingers. What's complicated about that? The simple logic of childhood laid bare what the adults had been carefully navigating for months. Marcus looked at Daniel, finding his own uncertainty reflected in the other man's eyes. "How about we finish making brunch?" Daniel suggested. "We can talk about living arrangements another time." Leo sighed dramatically but returned to his mixing. "Grown-ups always want to talk about things another time," he muttered. The meal proceeded with an undercurrent of tension that even Leo eventually noticed, his chatter diminishing as he picked up on the adults' discomfort. After they'd eaten, he asked to be excused to play video games, an activity usually restricted to after homework was complete. "Just for a little while," Daniel agreed, relieving all three of them from the awkward atmosphere. When Leo had disappeared into his room, Marcus began clearing the table, his movements mechanical. "I'm sorry about that," he said, not meeting Daniel's eyes. "I haven't said anything to him that would make him think—" "I know," Daniel interrupted, rising to help with the dishes. "Leo has his own ideas about how things should be. He always has." They worked in silence for a few minutes, loading the dishwasher, wiping down counters. Finally, Daniel spoke again. "He's not wrong, you know." Marcus looked up. "About what?" "About how I feel." Daniel set down the towel he was holding. "About you." The simple statement hung in the air between them. Marcus felt his heart rate accelerate, his palms suddenly damp. "Daniel, you don't have to say anything," Daniel said quickly. "I'm not expecting anything. I just didn't want to leave it unsaid." Not after Leo brought it up so directly. Marcus took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I feel the same way," he admitted quietly. "I have for a while now. But I didn't want to complicate things." With work, with Leo, Daniel stepped closer, not touching Marcus but close enough that he could if he chose to. "Some complications are worth it." he said softly. Don't you think? The question was gentle, without pressure or expectation. It offered a choice, a door that Marcus could walk through or not, as he wished. For a moment, fear gripped him. The old, familiar fear of loss that had kept him isolated for so long. What if he took this chance and it didn't work out? What if he lost not just Daniel, but Leo too? What if he lost the place he had begun to make for himself at the Imperial? But then he thought of that rainy afternoon months ago, when a hungry child had appeared in the diner and Marcus had chosen kindness over caution. That single decision had changed everything. Perhaps this one could too. Yes, Marcus said, finding his voice. Some complications are definitely worth it. The smile that broke across Daniel's face was like sunrise, warm and full of promise. He reached out slowly, giving Marcus time to step away if he wanted to. When he didn't, Daniel's hand came to rest gently against his cheek. We'll take it slow, Daniel promised. Figure it out as we go. Marcus nodded, leaning slightly into the touch. I'd like that. From down the hall came the muffled sounds of Leo's video game, a reminder of the responsibility they both shared to the child who had, in his own way, brought them together. And Leo? Marcus asked. Leo adores you, Daniel said simply. But we'll be careful there too. Make sure he understands that relationships between adults are complex, that nothing is guaranteed. Except that we both care about him, Marcus added. That won't change no matter what. Daniel's eyes softened. No, that won't change. He hesitated, then leaned forward slowly, giving Marcus every opportunity to pull back. Instead, Marcus closed the distance between them, their lips meeting in a kiss that felt both new and somehow familiar, as if they had been moving toward this moment since the day they met. When they separated, Daniel rested his forehead against Marcus's. So, he said, a smile in his voice, about that spare room full of boxes. Marcus laughed, the sound bubbling up from a place of happiness he had almost forgotten existed. One step at a time, he said, but I'm not opposed to discussing it. Eventually, Daniel agreed, taking Marcus's hand in his. We have time. In the months that followed, their lives wove together with the careful deliberation of people who understood the value of what they were building. Marcus did eventually move into the apartment above the Imperial, though into Daniel's room rather than the one full of boxes. Leo, far from being confused by the development, accepted it with the matter-of-fact adaptability of childhood. I told you it made sense, was his only comment when Marcus's meager possessions were unpacked and integrated into their home. The Imperial thrived, with Marcus gradually taking on more responsibility in the kitchen as his skills advanced. Daniel began teaching him the business side of restaurant management as well, conversations about food costs and vendor relationships extending into the late evenings. You could run your own place someday, Daniel remarked once, watching Marcus review the week's inventory sheets. You have the talent for it. Marcus looked up, surprised. I hadn't thought that far ahead. Daniel smiled. I have, for both of us. The implication that Daniel saw a future where they remained together, perhaps even as business partners, filled Marcus with a quiet joy he carried with him through the busy days and peaceful nights. 1 year to the day after Leo had wandered into the diner, Marcus found himself in the kitchen of the Imperial early, before the rest of the staff arrived. He was attempting to recreate something he hadn't made since his mother died. Her special Sunday pancakes with vanilla bean and orange zest folded into the batter. What are you doing up so early? Daniel asked, appearing in the doorway in pajama pants and a t-shirt, hair still mussed from sleep. Making pancakes, Marcus replied, carefully flipping a golden disc in the pan. My mother's recipe. I wanted to surprise Leo. Daniel came to stand beside him, slipping an arm around his waist. Any special occasion? Marcus nodded. It's been exactly 1 year since Leo came into the diner. Since everything changed, understanding dawned in Daniel's eyes. The anniversary of the $5 pancakes. Yes, Marcus transferred the pancake to a waiting plate. I thought we could celebrate. Daniel pressed a kiss to his temple. I think that's perfect. They called Leo down when the pancakes were ready, arranged on 3 plates with fresh berries and maple syrup. The boy appeared, still in his pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes. What's going on? He asked, climbing onto a stool at the kitchen counter. Marcus made special pancakes. Daniel explained, because today is an important anniversary. Leo looked between them, confused. It's not your anniversary. That's not until next month. Marcus smiled. Not that kind of anniversary. It's been exactly 1 year since you came into my diner, and I gave you pancakes. Leo's eyes widened. Really? A whole year? He looked down at the pancakes, then back up at Marcus. These look different than the ones you made me then. They are, Marcus admitted. These are my mother's special recipe. I haven't made them since she died. But I thought today was a good day to bring them back. Leo picked up his fork solemnly. Because if I hadn't come to your diner that day, we wouldn't all be together now. Exactly, Daniel said, taking a seat beside his son. Sometimes the smallest moments change everything. They ate together in the quiet morning kitchen, sunlight streaming through the windows and bathing them in golden light. As Marcus watched Daniel and Leo, their heads bent close as they discussed the day's plans. He felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. From the depths of loneliness, he had found his way to this, to family, to purpose, to love. All because he had chosen kindness on a rainy afternoon, spending his last $5 on a hungry child. Some might call it fate, or yunfen as Daniel would say. But Marcus preferred to think of it as the natural consequence of opening one's heart, even when, especially when, it seemed impossible to do so. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, noticing Marcus's contemplative expression. Marcus smiled, reaching out to take his hand. "Just that I'm grateful. For both of you. For everything." Leo, his mouth full of pancake, gave a thumbs up. Daniel squeezed Marcus's hand, his eyes conveying everything words couldn't. Outside, the city was coming to life, traffic increasing, pedestrians hurrying past, the rhythm of another day beginning. But here, in this kitchen filled with the scent of pancakes and the warmth of newfound family, time seemed to slow, creating a perfect moment of connection that had begun with $5 and a hungry child, and had grown into something neither man could have imagined possible. A second chance, a new beginning. A family created not by blood, but by choice, by kindness, by love.